Have you ever seen a mother slap her own daughter at a family wedding before 200 guests from Boston's elite? Picture this. You are at your sister's wedding, surrounded by judges, lawyers, donors, and families who built Boston. Then your mother hands you documents on stage and demands your $2 million penthouse as a wedding gift. You say no, and her palm crashes across your face so hard your silver earring flies over the marble floor. That was my reality on March 15th, 2024, inside the Fairmont Copley Plaza, under crystal light and public judgment. They expected me to cry, apologize, and surrender the way I always had whenever Evelyn Whitmore decided I should. Instead, I bent down, picked up my earring, walked out of the ballroom, and made one quiet phone call. Exactly 1 hour later, a woman entered the reception with a lawyer and documents that shattered my mother's lies. When Evelyn Whitmore saw who it was, she started screaming because the woman she called senile had returned. The person she told everyone was confused and gone was very much alive, lucid, and carrying proof of everything. Before I take you there, know this story did not begin at the wedding, or even with the penthouse itself. It began 3 years earlier, with one phone call on a quiet Tuesday evening in March of 2021. I was in my Somerville studio apartment, eating leftover pad thai and reviewing kitchen renovation blueprints for work. My business was small then, but steady, and I loved those peaceful evenings when no one could judge my choices. Then my phone lit up with my grandmother's name, and everything I thought I understood about my family changed. "Claire Whitmore, sweetheart," Margaret Whitmore said, her voice calm and exact. "I need you to listen carefully." Margaret Whitmore had taught at Harvard Law for 31 years, and she never called just to fill silence. She was a woman who chose every word with care, so when she spoke, people paid attention and remembered. She told me she was updating her will and leaving me the penthouse at 150 Seaport Boulevard in Boston. She had bought it in 2015 for $1.8 million, and by then it was worth more than $2 million. I set down my chopsticks and stared at the wall because I did not understand why she would choose only me. I asked why, not because I did not want it, but because I truly could not explain her decision. She answered simply, "Because you are the only one who visits me every Sunday, year after year, without fail." She said I remembered her favorite tulips, sat with her when she felt dull, and treated her like family, not duty. My eyes burned because no one in my family had ever described love with such honesty or such quiet gratitude. "The paperwork will be finalized next month," Margaret Whitmore said. "Adrian Cole is handling everything for me." Adrian Cole had been her attorney for years, a careful man she trusted with every serious legal decision. Then she paused and added one sentence that would haunt me long after the call ended. "Your mother will not be pleased." At the time, I thought she meant there would be tension, some cold calls, maybe a few nasty family dinners. I did not realize she meant war, the kind fought with smiles, rumors, silence, and public humiliation. Somehow the news leaked within weeks, though I never found out exactly who carried it into my mother's circle. Maybe someone from Adrian Cole's firm talked, or maybe Boston's legal world was just too small to hold secrets. All I know is that by April 2021, my mother had arranged what she called a family discussion at home. Her house in Beacon Hill was worth millions and designed to impress anyone who crossed its polished threshold. When I walked into the living room, I knew instantly that this was not a discussion but a staged hearing. Charles Whitmore sat in his leather chair, distant and unreadable, already looking like a judge instead of a father. Evelyn Whitmore sat on the settee in perfect posture, every jewel placed to suggest restraint, taste, and power. Vanessa Whitmore perched on the couch arm like she was waiting for a photographer to find her best angle. They left one empty chair for me, straight-backed and facing all three of them like a witness chair in court. "We need to talk about your grandmother's condition," Evelyn Whitmore said, voice smooth as polished broken glass. I sat down slowly and said the truth. Margaret Whitmore seemed completely fine every time I visited her. My mother crossed her legs and said leaving a $2 million property to one grandchild was not rational behavior. I told her Margaret Whitmore was not excluding anyone. She was choosing to give me something she wanted me to have. Then Vanessa Whitmore made a small theatrical sound, like a child pretending grief in front of useful witnesses. She said it was unfair because she loved Grandma too, but she was simply too busy to visit often. I thought of her trust fund, her fiancé's yacht, and the way she confused entitlement with effort. Then Charles Whitmore finally spoke in the measured tone men like him use when they want to sound reasonable. He said the fair thing would be for me to refuse the inheritance or sell the penthouse and split the money. I stared at him. This man who missed my graduation for a golf tournament and still talked about fairness. Charles Whitmore had not asked about my life in years, yet suddenly he had opinions about what I owed family. I said I was not declining anything, and I was not selling anything that Margaret Whitmore had chosen to leave me. I told them if they had a problem, they could take it up directly with the woman who made the decision. The room changed instantly, like the air had lost warmth and every soft surface had turned to stone. Evelyn Whitmore's smile disappeared, and in its place I saw what lived underneath all her refinement. Contempt. She told me she hoped I was prepared for the consequences of being so selfish and so ungrateful. I still hear that sentence sometimes, not because it hurt, but because of how familiar it had always been. In my family, selfish meant refusing to disappear. Ungrateful meant refusing to obey a script already written for me. By summer 2021, I was quietly removed from the family text chain without explanation and without even basic pretense. I found out about Vanessa Whitmore's engagement party through an Instagram post full of champagne and cousins I knew. The venue was the Boston Harbor Hotel, elegant and expensive, the exact kind of place my mother loved to display status. The caption announced the future Mrs. Caldwell with diamonds and celebration, while I stared at it like a stranger. No one had texted me. No one had invited me. No one had thought I deserved direct honesty. When I asked Evelyn Whitmore about it, she said they assumed I would be too busy to attend. She called my interior design studio, my little decorating business, like years of work were a hobby with invoices. At that point, I had 12 active clients, a license, and revenue that had doubled over the previous year. None of that mattered to Evelyn Whitmore, because success only counted if it came wrapped in pedigree or a rich husband. The exclusion would have been bearable on its own, but what followed was far worse than being left out. My mother began telling stories about me at gatherings, lunches, and neighborhood events where reputations traveled faster than truth. She said I had manipulated Margaret Whitmore, visited constantly, and turned her against the rest of the family. She warned people that elderly women were vulnerable and that greed often wore the face of devotion. In her version, I was not a granddaughter who cared. I was a predator circling a lonely old woman. She made me sound calculating, opportunistic, and shameless, the daughter who profited from confusion and failing memory. More than once, I overheard these stories myself when I showed up to events no one expected me to attend. I never corrected her publicly, never raised my voice, and never gave anyone the scene they were waiting for. I thought silence would protect me, or at least help the storm pass without feeding it more oxygen. I did not understand then that silence was exactly what Evelyn Whitmore relied on to keep her version alive. Around that same time, Margaret Whitmore moved into Brookhaven Senior Living in Wellesley, and that confused me deeply. It was beautiful, expensive, and peaceful. But it felt strange that she would leave her own home so abruptly. She told me she wanted quiet and distance from drama, and I accepted that explanation because I trusted her. Yet sometimes, during our Sunday visits, I caught a flicker in her eyes that looked dangerously close to fear. One afternoon, I finally asked if something had happened between her and Evelyn Whitmore that I should know. She looked out at the manicured gardens for a long time before saying, "Some things were better left alone." "At least for now," she added, and I let the question die because I thought love meant patience. I should not have let it go. That silence cost us 3 years and nearly cost us far more. I would not understand what she was hiding until December 2023, 3 months before the wedding that changed everything. I was in my studio reviewing fabric samples for a Brooklyn townhouse project when the mail arrived that Friday afternoon. Among invoices and catalogs sat an envelope of thick cream cardstock with calligraphy grand enough to feel theatrical. It was a wedding invitation for Vanessa Whitmore, set for March 15, 2024, at the Fairmont Copley Plaza. Black tie, formal reception. A room full of exactly the people Evelyn Whitmore spent her life trying to impress. I stared at the invitation for a full minute because after 2 years of exclusion, it felt almost absurd. No holidays, no birthdays, no casual messages, no concern, and suddenly I was welcome for the grand performance. That same evening, my phone rang, and I knew before answering that the invitation was not what it seemed. "Claire Whitmore, darling," Evelyn Whitmore said warmly, using a tone I had not heard in years. She asked if I had received the invitation and called the wedding a chance for our family to heal. She said it was time to move forward and show everyone that the Whitmores were united and still respectable. I waited because with my mother, kindness was rarely the point. It was only the wrapping around a demand. Then she said she had been thinking about the Penthouse and how perfect the wedding would be to revisit it. She explained that Vanessa Whitmore and Nathaniel Caldwell needed a home worthy of a young couple's future. She said they would return from the honeymoon needing a place appropriate to their new status and social obligations. I closed my eyes because there it was, plain and shameless. The invitation was bait, not reconciliation. I told her the Penthouse was mine because Margaret Whitmore had left it to me, and that had not changed. She answered that nothing had to change except the deed because I could transfer it as a wedding gift. She said, imagine how generous it would look, how proud Grandma would be to see me support my sister. My breath caught at the cruelty of using Margaret Whitmore's love as an argument to erase her wishes. I said I was not transferring anything, not for appearances, not for family image, and not for pressure. The warmth vanished from her voice so quickly it felt like a curtain dropping over a stage set. She said Vanessa Whitmore deserved a proper start because she was marrying into the Caldwell family and their world. She reminded me that Nathaniel Caldwell's father was a managing partner at Ropes and Gray and expected a certain life. She spoke of entertaining, hosting, and status, as if a home were only a mirror for other people's opinions. I told her that if the Caldwells needed a grand home, then Nathaniel Caldwell's father could buy one. Silence stretched between us, but it was not uncertainty. It was the sound of my mother deciding how to punish me. When Evelyn Whitmore spoke again, her voice had become cold enough to leave frost through the phone line. She said she expected me to think carefully before the wedding and to make the right choice by then. Then she hung up, leaving me in my studio with winter light sliding across fabric and unfinished drawings. I sat there and understood for the first time what refusing her in public could truly cost me. If I went and said no in front of Boston's legal circles, she would weaponize every connection she had. My business lived on referrals, discretion, and reputation, and those were the exact currencies she knew how to poison. But if I stayed home, it would look like surrender, guilt, fear, or proof that I had something to hide. I considered skipping the wedding more than once, and each time something stubborn rose up inside me and refused. I had done nothing wrong. I had accepted love. I would not behave like a criminal to ease their greed. So I RSVP'd yes, even though every instinct in my body told me I was walking into a trap. 1 week before the wedding, my phone rang at 7 a.m. with Margaret Whitmore's name. Her voice carried a sharp urgency I had heard only a handful of times, and it made me sit upright instantly. She told me to listen carefully and to write down Adrian Cole's number in case something happened at the wedding. I grabbed a pen and repeated the number back while asking what on earth she thought was going to happen. She said Evelyn Whitmore thought she did not know what was being planned, but she had not forgotten how lawyers work. "I practiced law before your mother was born," Margaret Whitmore said, and I could hear steel under every word. She told me Adrian Cole had all the documents ready, and if I needed them, he would know what to do. I asked what documents she meant, but she did not answer directly, and that frightened me more than if she had. Instead, she made me promise to remember the number and then said, "Whatever happens, I love you, sweetheart." She hung up before I could ask another question, leaving me with a saved number and shaking hands. I would not understand her warning until I stepped into the Fairmont and felt the wedding unfold around me. The Fairmont Copley Plaza rose over Copley Square like a monument to old money, discretion, and inherited power. I had passed it countless times in my life, but that evening it felt less like a hotel than a battlefield. Inside, white orchids spilled from chandeliers while a 12-piece jazz band played music too polished for what was coming. Waiters moved with silver trays, champagne and canapes, and every detail announced luxury shaped by Evelyn Whitmore's taste. During cocktail hour, I counted 127 chairs because numbers steadied me when emotions threatened to spill. Judges, lawyers, doctors, bankers, old Boston families, donors, and women who measured each other by invitations and jewelry. These were not just guests. They were my mother's audience, her witnesses, and the people she meant to impress. I wore a navy dress that felt elegant but careful, because even clothing could become evidence in her hands. Too expensive and I would be flaunting inherited money. Too plain and I would be embarrassing the family. In the end, I chose something that felt like me, and that alone felt like a small act of resistance. About 10 minutes after I arrived, Charles Whitmore found me standing near an ice sculpture shaped like a swan. He nodded and said he was glad I could make it, the way a man speaks to furniture he recognizes. We stood there in silence, father and daughter, proving that 32 years can still leave two people with nothing. Then Vanessa Whitmore floated toward me in white tulle and crystal shine, perfect as a bridal advertisement. She hugged me without quite touching, like a socialite embracing a stranger she may need later. She smiled for the room and said, "You came," as though my attendance were a dramatic act of mercy. I told her of course I came because she was my sister, though the word felt thinner than ever. Her face changed almost immediately, sweetness sliding aside to reveal the calculation waiting beneath her bridal glow. She asked if I had brought the paperwork, and for a second I genuinely thought I had misheard her. When I asked what paperwork, Vanessa Whitmore said our mother expected the transfer documents to be ready that day. She said it lightly, almost playfully, like we were discussing flowers or music instead of my legal property. That was the moment I understood they had already decided I would comply before ever asking what I wanted. I told her there were no transfer documents because the penthouse was not a gift and not open for negotiation. Her smile twitched, and she said she and Nathaniel Caldwell had already planned to move in after the honeymoon. They had even told their realtor they would not need the Back Bay condo because my home was already theirs. I looked at her and said that announcing possession of someone else's apartment did not make it belong to you. She said I did not even need it because I still lived in a little place in Somerville. She said I did not entertain, did not host powerful people, and had no one important to impress anyway. There it was again, the family question hidden under every insult. What was the point of me having anything valuable? I answered that the point was simple. Margaret Whitmore wanted me to have it, and her wishes mattered. Vanessa Whitmore stared at me, then leaned close enough for her expensive perfume to become suffocating. She whispered that our mother would handle this, and when she did, I should not say I was not warned. Then she swept back toward her bridesmaids, leaving me alone beside a swan made of melting ice and social tension. I headed for the bar, hoping a drink might steady the tightness in my chest before the night worsened. Instead, a woman in a cream suit stepped into my path with the expression of someone approaching good gossip. I recognized Sylvia Mercer, one of Evelyn Whitmore's tennis friends and the wife of a federal judge. She smiled and said I must be Claire Whitmore because Evelyn Whitmore had mentioned me many times. I told her I was sure she had, and she replied that she heard I was holding property for my grandmother. The phrasing told me everything. In my mother's story, I was not an heir but a caretaker of temporary assets. Sylvia Mercer asked whether I would be selling the apartment soon, as though that were the obvious next step. I told her I actually lived there, and her raised eyebrows said more than any words could. She excused herself quickly, retreating into the crowd with the expression of someone whose script had suddenly changed. Standing there alone, I finally understood how much groundwork Evelyn Whitmore had laid before this wedding night. Every lunch, every event, every whispered comment had prepared this room to see me as selfish before I spoke. I escaped to the balcony because the ballroom had become too warm, too bright, and too carefully hostile. March air hit my face hard, and for a moment the cold felt kinder than anything inside. I leaned against the stone railing and tried to slow my heartbeat while the city lights shimmered below. That was when my phone buzzed again with Margaret Whitmore's name, and I answered immediately. She asked what was happening, and when I asked how she knew something was wrong, she gave a tired laugh. "Because I know my daughter," Margaret Whitmore said. "She has been building her case and gathering witnesses. She said Evelyn Whitmore needed an audience for everything, because humiliation was only satisfying if other people saw it. Then she asked whether I still had Adrian Cole's number and told me again to call if anything happened. I pressed my hand against the cold stone and asked what exactly she was not telling me. A long pause followed, and then Margaret Whitmore finally said a friend of mine had visited her months earlier. The friend was Ethan Brooks, my college friend turned investigative reporter at the Boston Globe's investigative desk. He had been looking into irregular real estate transactions and found something strange attached to my grandmother's name. It was a Cape Cod property supposedly sold in 2020 for $875,000. But according to Margaret Whitmore, she had never sold that house, never approved it, and never signed anything. My whole body went still as I asked what she meant, though I already knew the answer would be terrible. She said Evelyn Whitmore had sold it using forged signatures, and she had only uncovered the truth later. I could barely breathe. My mother had not only slandered me, she had stolen from her own mother. Margaret Whitmore said she wanted to doubt it at first, so she hired experts to test the signatures. A Boston firm called Forensic Document Services compared the sale documents with her genuine handwritten samples. Their conclusion was brutal in its precision. The probability of forgery was 98.7%. I asked why she had not gone to police right away, and her answer broke my heart. She said because Evelyn Whitmore was still her daughter, and part of her hoped there was some explanation, but there was no explanation good enough for forged deeds, stolen property, and lies spread through family and society. That was why she moved to Brookhaven, not for peace alone, but because she no longer trusted her own child. She told me she had protected what she could, including the penthouse and her remaining assets, while waiting. I asked what she was waiting for, and she said she was waiting for Evelyn Whitmore to make a mistake. Tonight, she said, might be that mistake, because public cruelty often makes arrogant people careless and reckless. Margaret Whitmore told me if I was cornered, I was not alone and had never truly been alone. She told me not to sign anything, no matter how much pressure or shame they tried to force on me. If it went badly, I was to call Adrian Cole and tell him only that the documents were needed. Then, softer, she told me that if Adrian Cole called her, she would be there within the hour. I have been waiting 3 years for this, Margaret Whitmore said. I am not going to miss it. She hung up, and I stood on the balcony with the wind in my hair and the truth in my chest. My mother was not just manipulative. She was desperate, exposed, and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. I smoothed my dress, lifted my chin, and walked back into the ballroom as if I still believed I was ready. By 7:30, dinner had been served and cleared, and the toasts had begun to blur together into polished noise. Charles Whitmore gave a stiff speech about legacy and values, as if he had ever defended either in private. Nathaniel Caldwell's father praised the union of two great Boston families with the confidence of inherited certainty. The maid of honor told a sorority story everyone laughed at politely, and I sat near the back at table 14. My table held distant cousins and family friends who looked unsure why I had been invited after all this time. Fine by me. I wanted invisibility, distance, and one uneventful exit before the night could fracture any further. But Evelyn Whitmore had not invited me to disappear quietly. She had invited me to perform my surrender. The clink of metal against crystal cut through the room, and suddenly every conversation in the ballroom stopped. My mother stood at the head table with a champagne flute in one hand and a microphone in the other. Her gown glittered under the chandeliers as she smiled and announced she had something very special to share. She called it a family tradition, something Vanessa Whitmore had asked her to help present that very evening. The first warning prickle ran down my spine before she even spoke my name, because I knew what this was. She said the Whitmore family believed in sacrifice, support, and taking care of each other no matter the cost. Then her eyes found me in the back of the room, and she invited me to come to the stage. 127 faces turned toward table 14, and in that instant refusing felt like a fresh trap. If I stayed seated, I would be the difficult daughter ruining the bride's night for no reason at all. So I stood and walked through the maze of tables, feeling every stare like weight pressed against my skin. I stepped onto the platform where Evelyn Whitmore waited with her polished smile and controlling hand. She wrapped an arm around my shoulders for the audience, but her grip said this was not affection. It was control. Into the microphone, she announced that our mother had left me a beautiful penthouse in the Seaport district. She made sure to say the value aloud, over $2 million, so the number could stir envy and attention. Murmurs rippled through the guests as she continued, saying I had been keeping it safe for the family. Then Evelyn Whitmore said tonight was the perfect moment for me to share it with Vanessa Whitmore. She produced a folder thick with legal papers, already prepared with my name placed neatly on the signature lines. Transfer deed, quitclaim agreement, a polished theft package disguised as generosity and handed to me under chandeliers. All Claire Whitmore needs to do is sign, my mother said, smiling as though this were sweet tradition. The room actually applauded, and the sound made my stomach turn because they thought coercion was a touching gesture. I looked at the papers, then at the crowd, and finally at my mother, and I said one word. My voice was steady when I said I would not sign, because the penthouse belonged to me by lawful will. Evelyn Whitmore kept smiling and told me not to be nervous because it was only paperwork. I answered that it was not just paperwork. It was the apartment Margaret Whitmore left specifically to me. The applause died instantly, and the silence that followed felt louder than any shout I had ever heard. My mother tightened her grip and told me not to make this difficult in front of everyone who mattered. I said I was not making it difficult. I was simply telling the truth and refusing to be cornered. Then Vanessa Whitmore appeared at the edge of the platform with wounded innocence painted carefully across her face. She asked if I was really going to do this on her wedding day, as though I had staged this cruelty. I told her I had not asked to be put on display and had not agreed to any of this. Vanessa Whitmore snapped that they already knew I would be selfish and choose a stupid apartment over family. I answered that the apartment was not stupid when she and Nathaniel Caldwell had planned to move into it. Around us, waiters froze and guests looked down at their tables as elegance collapsed right in front of them. Then Evelyn Whitmore lost the last of her composure and called me an ungrateful child before the room. She shouted that after everything they had done for me, I could not do one thing for my sister. Something inside me finally broke open, not into panic, but into clarity that had waited years for air. I said they had never supported my business and that Evelyn Whitmore had never even visited my studio. I said they had not raised me the way they claimed because Margaret Whitmore carried me through every summer. Gasps moved across the ballroom, but I could not stop now because the truth had already started moving. I said the penthouse was mine because Margaret Whitmore wanted me to have it, because I had been there. I said no amount of public humiliation would change her will, her intent, or the law protecting that gift. Evelyn Whitmore's hand moved before I saw it, and then it crashed across my left cheek with full force. The blow snapped my head sideways, and my silver earring flew off and skittered over the marble floor. The room went dead still. Even the jazz band seemed trapped in silence, instruments suspended with unfinished notes. My cheek burned, my eyes blurred, and every guest in that ballroom waited to see if I would crumble. I did the only thing that felt possible. I bent down and picked up the earring she had knocked away. It was bent, but not broken, and that felt almost symbolic enough to make me laugh if I could. I straightened it carefully, put it back on, and looked straight at Evelyn Whitmore without shaking. "That is the last time you touch me," I said, and I was proud my voice sounded calm. Then I turned away from the platform, the guests, the whispers, and the family that had mistaken me for weak. I walked out of the ballroom without running because dignity was the one thing I would not surrender there. In the lobby, near the concierge desk, I found a quiet corner and took out my phone. I called the number Margaret Whitmore had given me and waited through a single ring before someone answered. "Adrian Cole's office," the voice said, and I told them who I was with complete startling calm. "Please tell my grandmother that the documents are needed," I said, exactly as I had been instructed. The reply came immediately. "Understood, Miss Whitmore." She would be there within the hour with what was needed. I hung up, sat on a velvet bench, touched my stinging cheek, and realized I only had to wait 1 hour. That was all that stood between my mother's performance and the truth she thought she had buried. At 8:45 p.m., the main doors opened, and Margaret Whitmore walked into the Fairmont lobby with a cane. She was 78, slower than when I was a child, yet somehow more formidable than anyone in that building. She wore a gray cashmere coat over a black dress, silver hair pinned back, eyes sharp as courtroom steel. Beside her walked Adrian Cole, carrying a leather briefcase with the calm gravity of a man prepared for battle. When I said, "Grandma, you came," my composure finally cracked because seeing her made everything suddenly real. Margaret Whitmore took my face in both hands, studied the mark on my cheek, and asked if she hit me. I said yes, and something hard passed across her expression before she kissed my forehead gently and stepped back. "Then let's finish this," Margaret Whitmore said, and together we walked back toward the ballroom doors. Inside, the reception had dissolved into stunned clusters, half-finished drinks, and people pretending not to stare. Vanessa Whitmore was crying openly now while Nathaniel Caldwell and his parents hovered in embarrassed confusion. Evelyn Whitmore stood near the head table arguing with Charles Whitmore, both of them unraveling under the lights. No one noticed us at first, and then someone gasped, and then the whole room shifted its attention. Evelyn Whitmore turned, saw her mother walking toward her, and went so pale she looked almost ill. "Mother!" she choked out, but the word sounded less like love than fear stepping into public view. She stammered, asking what this was and how Margaret Whitmore had even gotten there that night. My grandmother answered that she had come for her granddaughter's wedding, invited or not, because truth rarely waits politely. Then she stopped 10 feet away and turned to face the room that Evelyn Whitmore had gathered. In a voice carrying perfectly through the silence, Margaret Whitmore introduced herself as a retired Harvard law professor. She declared that she was of sound mind and fully capable of stating her legal wishes without confusion. She confirmed that the penthouse at 150 Seaport Boulevard had been left to Claire Whitmore in her will. She said that will, dated June 14, 2019, was lawful, valid, enforceable, and subject to no competing claim. At her side, Adrian Cole opened his briefcase and removed a certified copy of the filed will. He identified himself as her attorney and said the document was notarized and on record with Suffolk County Probate Court. Evelyn Whitmore tried to interrupt, saying her mother was confused, distressed, and did not understand what she was saying. Margaret Whitmore answered with ice in her voice that what she understood perfectly was her daughter's greed. She said she had been watching Evelyn Whitmore for 3 years and knew exactly how long the lies had lasted. Then Adrian Cole produced a second set of records tied to a Cape Cod property, sold in September 2020. My grandmother stated clearly that the house had been deeded in her name and sold without her permission or knowledge. She said she could not possibly have signed those papers because she was in Massachusetts General recovering from a broken hip. The room was so quiet I could hear ice melting in abandoned buckets near the bar. Adrian Cole then removed a third document, the forensic handwriting analysis from Boston-based document specialists. He explained that authentic samples had been compared with the sales signature attributed to Margaret Whitmore. The report concluded the signature was inconsistent with her true hand and carried a 98.7% likelihood of forgery. Murmurs broke across the ballroom like a wave, and even the most polished guests could not hide their reactions. I saw Nathaniel Caldwell's father exchange a heavy look with another attorney near the champagne station. Evelyn Whitmore shouted that it was all fabricated and accused her own mother of being senile and manipulated. Margaret Whitmore replied that she was sharp enough to hire experts and sharp enough to preserve evidence. Then she said the entire file had already been forwarded to the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office the week before. The color drained completely from Evelyn Whitmore's face when she realized the law was already moving without her. My grandmother spoke almost gently then, explaining forgery and fraud could carry prison time under Massachusetts law. She said she had not wanted to believe her own daughter could do something so deliberate and so cruel. She said she had given Evelyn Whitmore 3 years to confess, repair the harm, and tell the truth. Instead, Evelyn Whitmore spent those years calling me manipulative, calling her mother senile, and plotting to steal again. Then Evelyn Whitmore spun toward Charles Whitmore and demanded he say something, fix it, deny it, do anything. For once, Charles Whitmore looked less important than frightened, and he took a small step backward. He said he did not know about the Cape Cod house, though his voice lacked any force or moral weight. Evelyn Whitmore shrieked that he had signed the transfer documents and stood beside her the entire time. He replied that he signed what she told him to sign and did not know the signature was forged. It was a pitiful defense, and everyone in the room knew it, even those who wanted to pity him. Then Vanessa Whitmore spoke, her voice small and broken, asking what exactly her grandmother meant by all this. But no one could answer in a way that would restore the wedding, the image, or the years lost already. Margaret Whitmore turned to me then and apologized for how long it had taken her to bring this truth forward. I took her hand and told her I understood, because love can hesitate even when evidence is merciless. She squeezed my fingers and faced Evelyn Whitmore one final time under the same chandeliers meant for celebration. She said she had lost her daughter the day she discovered the fraud, and tonight everyone else saw why. Then she said she hoped Evelyn Whitmore would one day take responsibility, though she would not expect it. With that, Margaret Whitmore turned toward the exit, and I walked beside her without looking back. Behind us, Evelyn Whitmore started screaming in fragments, denials, accusations, panic, and demands that someone stop this. I heard the Caldwells say something clipped and final to Vanessa Whitmore, and the room erupted into whispers. But I did not turn around, because nothing behind me was mine to carry anymore. We reached the lobby before Nathaniel Caldwell caught up with us, his polished shoes striking the marble fast. I expected outrage, maybe a threat, but what crossed his face first was calculation, not grief or loyalty. He addressed Margaret Whitmore directly and suggested a private conversation to clear up possible misunderstandings. My grandmother looked at him the way a professor looks at a student who has mistaken nerve for intelligence. She said there were no misunderstandings, only forged paperwork, criminal conduct, and a family trained to ignore both. Nathaniel Caldwell tried again, calling it a family dispute and saying lawyers could sort out complicated details quietly. Margaret Whitmore corrected him at once. Forged deeds and fraud were not misunderstandings. They were crimes. Then his mask slipped further and he raised the real issue, the penthouse, and whether her will might be reconsidered. He mentioned the new marriage, future family, and changing circumstances, hoping greed sounded better in formal language. Margaret Whitmore cut him off and said the penthouse belonged to Claire Whitmore, and that would not change. She added that if he hoped for any remaining assets, marrying into the wrong branch of the family had solved that. For a moment, anger flashed across Nathaniel Caldwell's face, but fear quickly overtook it and sent him retreating. Adrian Cole stepped between us and advised him to return to his wedding before he said something legally unwise. Outside, the March air felt almost holy after the pressure and poison trapped inside that ballroom. Streetlights cast gold over wet stone while the city moved on, unaware that my family had just exploded behind us. I apologized to Margaret Whitmore for the scene, the wedding, the public disaster, and all the pain around it. She patted my arm and said not to be sorry because she had waited 3 years to say those words aloud. Despite everything, I laughed then, raw and shaky, because her honesty cut straight through the shock. I asked what happened next, and Adrian Cole explained that the district attorney would review the evidence. He said charges would depend on that review, but the documentation was strong and the facts looked deeply damaging. I asked about Evelyn Whitmore, and Margaret Whitmore's face softened into something like grief without surrender. She said the courts would handle what came next because she had done what she needed to do at last. I told them I was not doing any of this for revenge, though part of me still trembled with vindication. Margaret Whitmore said truth was not cruelty, and that some lies became too dangerous to let survive. A town car pulled up, arranged by Adrian Cole, and he suggested taking her back to Brookhaven to rest. She insisted she was not fragile, only tired, and then turned to me with the softness she always saved for private moments. She told me to visit tomorrow because we had much to talk about, including my real life and real work. I promised I would, and when she hugged me, it felt like the first embrace of an honest future. "I love you, my sweet girl," Margaret Whitmore whispered, and I told her I loved her too. I watched the car disappear into the Boston night and stood alone on the sidewalk for a long time. Then my phone buzzed with a message from Ethan Brooks, who had seen a cryptic post from Boston legal reporters. He asked if the whispers online were connected to my family, and I answered that I would explain later. I thanked him for everything, because without his curiosity, the buried fraud might have stayed buried much longer. Another message came from an unknown number, and this one surprised me more than the first. It was Lauren Pierce, a woman from the wedding who admitted she had believed things she should not have believed. She apologized for trusting Evelyn Whitmore's version of me and asked whether I might consider design work for her firm. I read the message twice because apology and opportunity arriving together felt almost too clean to trust. Still, I saved the number, pulled my coat tight, and headed toward the parking garage, able to breathe again. The fallout began within 2 weeks, swift in movement yet careful in the language institutions use to protect themselves. Evelyn Whitmore was summoned to the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office for questioning about the Cape Cod sale. The interview reportedly lasted 4 hours, and when she emerged, Adrienne Cole later said she looked 10 years older. An attorney from her social circle initially agreed to represent her, then withdrew almost immediately after reviewing the evidence. I suspected he wanted no part of a sinking case, especially not one watched closely by Boston legal circles. On March 28th, Charles Whitmore moved into the Ritz-Carlton because even collapse did not stop his devotion to appearances. Through a family friend, he released a statement saying he needed space and had no prior knowledge of wrongdoing. Whether anyone believed him was another question, because his signature sat plainly on the same transfer documents. Vanessa Whitmore and Nathaniel Caldwell postponed their honeymoon while his family assessed the legal and social damage. The dream of moving into my penthouse was over, and suddenly that loss looked very small beside everything else. The social consequences unfolded with the quiet precision only elite circles can manage when they decide someone is untouchable. On April 3rd, Evelyn Whitmore received notice that her role in a major charity gala was under review. The language was corporate and polite, but the meaning was obvious. She was being pushed out before the scandal spread further. The Boston Bar Association opened an ethics inquiry after 2 attorneys who attended the wedding filed formal complaints. They did not accuse her of harming them personally. They alleged conduct unbecoming an officer of the court. Then a small item appeared in the Boston Globe legal column about an unnamed attorney under active fraud investigation. No names were printed, but Boston's legal world is too small for anonymity once the right facts begin circulating. Within hours, everyone important knew exactly which family and which attorney the article had quietly described. That same week, I got 11 texts from people I had not heard from in years. Some messages offered support, some offered apology. A few only wanted gossip, and those I ignored without regret. The one that mattered most came from Lauren Pierce, who followed up with a formal, thoughtful email. She wrote that she had believed lies for years and felt ashamed after seeing how calmly I faced humiliation. She said she did not expect forgiveness, but she wanted to offer something concrete rather than empty sympathy. Her law firm was renovating 2 conference rooms and a reception area, and she wanted me to pitch for the work. I sat with that email for 3 days because part of me wanted nothing from people in my mother's orbit. But another part understood that Lauren Pierce was not Evelyn Whitmore. She was someone trying to do better. So I took the meeting, cautious but professional, and listened instead of punishing her for old assumptions. The project was worth $82,000 and became the largest contract my studio had ever received. By May, 2 more attorneys from the wedding had reached out about design work after hearing about my firm. Word was spreading. Not just about Evelyn Whitmore's fall, but about the daughter who had refused to break. I did not trust everyone. I screened clients carefully and turned away one person who wanted gossip more than design. But slowly, carefully, my business began to grow in ways I could trace back only to truth finally surfacing. In early May, a certified letter arrived from a Cape Cod real estate attorney handling the disputed property title. The 2020 sale was under legal review, and the current owners had been informed of possible defects in the chain. Adrienne Cole explained that if the original sale were voided for fraud, the buyers could sue Evelyn Whitmore. He said the house itself might even revert to Margaret Whitmore's estate, though the process could take years. It was complicated, expensive, and slow, yet the wheels had begun turning in a direction they could not stop. Evelyn Whitmore, who had spent her life collecting status, property, and influence, was watching it all slip from her hands. I will not pretend I felt nothing when that happened, because some part of me was relieved to see consequence. But the deeper feeling was peace, not vengeance, because justice is not triumph. It is recognition of what was true. By June 2024, 3 months after the wedding, I was sitting on my balcony watching sunset over Boston Harbor. Orange and pink spread over the water, and the city looked almost forgiving in that warm evening light. The penthouse was quiet, and Margaret Whitmore was there with me, just as she now was every Sunday. I picked her up from Brookhaven most weekends, and we spent the day talking, resting, or wandering museums. Sometimes we simply sat on that balcony with wine and silence, letting honesty feel ordinary for once. That evening, I told her Charles Whitmore had called the day before and wanted to explain his side. She raised one eyebrow, and I said he claimed he did not know about the Cape Cod house. He said Evelyn Whitmore handled the paperwork and that he signed where she told him without asking enough questions. Margaret Whitmore asked if I believed him, and I thought about the difference between ignorance and chosen blindness. I said I believed he chose not to know, and that he had probably been choosing that for 35 years. She nodded slowly, because some forms of cowardice wear such polished manners that people stop naming them. I told her I said I needed time and that any future relationship would require consistent effort, not explanation. He would have to earn access to my life through action over time, not through one convenient apology. Margaret Whitmore squeezed my hand and said that sounded like a healthy boundary, one rooted in self-respect. After a while, I mentioned that Vanessa Whitmore had texted me too, asking if I would call her. I said maybe not yet, maybe not for a very long time, because I could not pretend she had been innocent. She might not have known about the fraud, but she knew the pressure, the cruelty, and the lies aimed at me. She watched it happen for years and never once challenged the story that made my pain convenient for her. I said if she wanted a sister, she would first need to want the truth more than comfort. Until then, I would not slam the door forever, but I would not hold it open for her either. Margaret Whitmore smiled and said I had learned something she wished she had learned much younger. I asked what, and she said love without respect is not really love. Often it is only habit. She told me I deserved both, and those words settled somewhere deep inside me with unexpected gentleness. Around that same time, I had started therapy with Dr. Helen Carter every Tuesday afternoon in Cambridge. With Dr. Helen Carter, I spoke about family systems, boundaries, and the cost of shrinking myself to survive. It was exhausting work, but it was also the most important thing I had ever done for my own future. There was another new thing in my life, too, and this one arrived without manipulation, history, or social calculation. His name was Oliver Hayes, an architect I met at a design conference in May while discussing restoration work. He had kind eyes, a terrible sense of direction, and absolutely no idea who the Whitmores of Beacon Hill were. He liked my work, my laugh, and the way I talked to plants when I thought nobody noticed. It was slow, careful, and honest, the first time I let someone in without dreading what my family name meant. As the sunset deepened, Margaret Whitmore said she had been thinking about what she wanted her legacy to be. I gestured around the penthouse and said she had already given me a legacy, but she shook her head. She said she did not mean property. She meant the lesson she had learned too late and hoped I would keep. She admitted she had spent too many years keeping the peace, avoiding conflict, and allowing damage to deepen. She said silence had not saved anyone. It had only trained cruelty to believe it would never be challenged. Then Margaret Whitmore told me she wanted me to speak the truth, even when it was costly and hard. She wanted me to protect myself even when selfish people tried to rename that self-protection as cruelty. She wanted me to remember that kindness did not require silence, surrender, or disappearing for someone else's comfort. Tears burned behind my eyes when I promised I would remember every word she had just given me. Then she smiled and asked what was for dinner, because too much honesty always made her hungry. I laughed, and the sound filled the evening air in a home that was finally, unquestionably my own. This is my life now, a penthouse that is mine, a grandmother who loves me, and boundaries I keep. My studio is growing, my work is respected, and the future I am building belongs to no one else's approval. If you are hearing this while your family demands your peace, your money, or your silence, listen closely. You are allowed to say no, even when people call that selfish because your refusal interrupts their comfort. You are allowed to keep what was given to you in love without apologizing for someone else's entitlement. You are allowed to set boundaries with parents, siblings, spouses, and anyone who mistakes access for ownership. Being kind to yourself does not make you cruel. It gives you the strength to stop betraying your own needs. Telling the truth may cost you the fantasy other people preferred, but it also gives you back your breath. Protecting your peace is not a crime, and protecting your dignity is not betrayal, no matter who says otherwise. If this story reached something tender in you, remember that respect matters as much as love, maybe even more. And if someone keeps asking you to shrink so they can stay comfortable, that is not family. That is control. Choose clarity. Choose boundaries. Choose the people who show up when the room turns cold and the truth gets expensive. Choose the version of yourself that can pick up the bent earring, stand tall, and walk out with your name intact. That is the lesson I carry from Margaret Whitmore. Truth may come late, but late truth still changes lives. Thank you for staying with me through every part of this story, from the first call to the final sunset. I hope it reminds you that your voice matters, your boundaries matter, and your peace is worth protecting every day. If your family has ever tried to trade your dignity for appearances, know this: you never had to accept that bargain. Build your life carefully, speak clearly, and keep close the people who honor both your heart and your limits. And when the moment comes to choose between their comfort and your truth, choose your truth and keep walking. Some endings look like scandal from the outside, but from within they feel like oxygen returning after years underwater. Some no's sound harsh, only to people who benefited from your silence, your labor, or your fear. Let them be disappointed. Better their disappointment than your lifelong self-betrayal dressed up as obedience. The right people will not need you smaller, poorer, quieter, or easier to control in order to love you. They will love you with respect, and they will never ask you to sign away your home to prove it. If this story leaves you with one truth, let it be this: boundaries are not walls against love, they are doors. They show who is willing to enter your life with care, honesty, and reverence for what is not theirs. I did not lose everything at that wedding. I lost the illusion that sacrifice could buy me belonging. In its place, I gained clarity, freedom, and the kind of peace that starts only after the truth is spoken. So wherever you are right now, I hope you protect what is yours, honor who stood by you, and heal loudly. I hope you remember that your worth does not depend on a family willing to recognize it. I hope you choose people like Margaret Whitmore who love you enough to stand beside you when it matters most. And I hope you become that kind of person for yourself, especially when no one else in the room does. This was not just a wedding disaster. It was the day a lie collapsed and a life finally began again. From that day on, I stopped asking permission to keep what love had placed in my hands. I stopped negotiating with people who only valued me when I was useful, quiet, and easy to override. I stopped confusing family with safety, status with goodness, and silence with strength. I started choosing what healed me: honest work, true boundaries, therapy, rest, and people with clean intentions. That is what I want for anyone listening who feels trapped inside someone else's script of duty and shame. You can step off that stage. You can refuse the papers. You can make the call that changes everything. The people who count will reveal themselves when the music stops, the room goes silent, and truth walks in. Keep your head high when it does. Let the lies fall where they deserve, and do not carry them back home. Your peace is precious. Your name is yours. Your future does not belong to the loudest person in the family. Walk toward the life that respects you, and when you get there, sit in the sunset and breathe without guilt. That is my advice. Tell the truth, guard your boundaries, and never hand over your home to buy fake harmony.